This is an overview of Lesson 13, Coding and Version Control. Remember that last week the students started creating their prototype Google site. This week they should be given some time to continue to work on that. But we are also going to learn about the software version control process. This will be a conceptual treatment of it because by coding Google Sites, where Google does most of the coding for you, version control really isn't possible. So the students will learn about how version control will be done with actual coding, but they won't actually perform it. This week also has optionally some coding in it. If your students can do HTML coding, then we strongly encourage that you do the activities that are in this lesson plan where they do some HTML coding of their Google site to help remind them the Google sites are coded and to help inspire them to learn coding in subsequent computer science courses, where they start to understand that by being able to code, they have complete control of the entire process and aren't just limited to what Google Sites allows them. But if your students aren't ready to do HTML programming because of prerequisites not being met, then the HTML portion of this could be skipped. But it is important that they do the software version control conceptual learning so they have some idea of the process that goes on in the software industry. So the learning objectives are to learn what software version control is, how it's done in GitHub, and to start to make a web page with HTML coding. And this last learning objective, as I just mentioned, is optional and only do it if your students are ready to do HTML programming because they have seen it before. To learn about version control, there's several videos. There's an 11-minute, a 12-minute, and an introduction. So these 4 videos cover how version control is done in GitHub. And they do it using the example of a poem, writing lines in a poem and how version control would be done. Briefly, what version control is the idea that when you develop anything as a team, code being the main example, but in this video they use collaboratively writing a poem. If you're creating anything as a team, usually you want team members to be able to do their part and then contribute back to the whole. The problem is that if people are working individually, the changes that they make to the overall product may conflict with each other. It could be that in a poem, one student writes a verse that says something completely different than what the other verse is trying to do. So you need some process of being able to have the students work independently and then merge their contributions into something that makes sense in the overall whole. And the same thing happens in coding, where coding is a collaborative process usually done by teams. And the idea is that if I were working on a portion of code and my teammate were working on a portion of code, we could make changes to the overall code that conflict with each other. And what version control is the idea that I have my version, that my teammate has their version, and then the versions need to come together and be synthesized into a whole that makes sense. And this is what GitHub's main purpose is. And we've seen its use for issues and brainstorming. We've seen its use for project management. But GitHub's main purpose is version control, for teams to work together on software and be able to work independently and then merge their independent work into the cohesive whole. There's been a lot of thought put into how to do that, and that's what GitHub embodies. The videos that you see here discuss that again using a simple example of lines of a poem, not assuming that people know how to code, which is a good assumption for the students in your class. But by learning about how it works with a poem, they get the concepts. And it's up to you as the teacher to fill them in on, yes, you're seeing this with a poem, but the code that you know is underneath the Google site and the code that you've seen in some of your previous coding classes, you can see that if the individual students were coding and their code was brought together, there could be conflicts like you see in the poem. So that's part of your job as the teacher, is to translate the poem things that they're seeing into coding, but that the principles of version control are the same. So you can see here on day 1, they watch the videos, again in an I do, we do format, and they do an activity guide. And the activity guide asks them to reflect on what they saw, and it touches on some of the terminology that's used in GitHub: branching, merging. These are the kinds of things that are talked about in the videos and that the students need to understand the concept behind, and the activity guide assesses that. There's also a version control assignment, and day 2 is devoted to them working on that in class where you can help them. The assignment, if we take a look at it here, has them do HTML coding. So it has some review on HTML coding. If they had seen it in the previous course, they just need a little review. These reviews from Khan Academy give them enough HTML to be able to do the assignment. But again, it's not recommended that they use these videos here in this class as the first time of seeing HTML. These videos are for review, assuming they've done HTML in, say, a middle school computer science discoveries class, or a URI Intro to Computing and Data Science class in a high school. These things cover HTML programming. If you can assume your students have it, this is a good assignment. If not, don't give this assignment and just give them time to work on their prototype Google site. But after the review, it says go ahead and put some HTML tags in. Here's an example of the pricing that we saw on the WeWalk website that we showed in our last PD video. And it talks a little bit about version control. Again, this assignment could be skipped if you don't think they know HTML and you simply want to have them have more time to work on their prototype site. As usual, we provide an answer key and a rubric for grading that assignment if you give it. And if you do give it and you want to show the students what HTML code done under version control on a GitHub repo is, you can click here and it will take you to a live repo that we did for this class that shows here's the pricing web page on the WeWalk site with HTML code in it. And it's in a GitHub project where it was committed with version control. So you can see it's a GitHub project up here. And you could show them this even if they don't do the HTML programming, just to show what code in GitHub looks like. So again, this week is mostly about them learning about the version control process, but also giving them some time to keep working on the Google site, because they'll probably have some excitement from last week when they started to create it, that they'll want to continue working on it. And it is important to give them that time each week so they can continue to build a Google site that they're proud of.